Cool. You don't really need to do that. Okay, so how many of you play games? That's the first question. Are there any people who don't play games here? Okay, hopefully all of you. Who cheated in games so far? Have you cheated in games? Okay. How many of you cheated in multiplayer games? How many of you paid for it? Okay, one guy paid for it. Good. How much? We'll never learn. Okay. So, game and player security. I see the scum guy here, so good on that. We have very similar issues, so hopefully we'll talk to each other again in the next 2 days. So, who am I and what I have done before and how to contact me? I worked on DayZ in production for 5 years now. Before that, I worked on some mobile titles, architecture in enterprise, even like Ministry of Justice as well in their DMS systems. So it's a long road to games for me. I spent like 8 years in enterprise before I joined games. And I've been focusing on game security in the last 5 years, and it started with my presentation on GDC, basically, where I summed up my experiences on DayZ. You can always reach out to me with any questions. You can find me on most social media, and I'm usually an open networker, so go ahead if you have any questions. Game security and cheating, how is it done and why? That's something that we're going to definitely talk about. How do we fight against it? And we're also going to talk about player security and management of incidents, which is the second part, and how do we make our players secure. Business of cheating. That's the first part, and I have a couple disclaimers to go through. This talk mostly applies to always online multiplayer games. We're not going to be talking about cheating in cities skylines. It's not important right now. Always question your and my perception of the topic. Don't be afraid to think for yourself. Do your research. I've failed so many times that I think that's a very good advice. Read, talk to people, network. There is no recipes for success, and a lot can change in a short time, especially in cheating. Some of the new stuff that the guys have been doing in the cheating scene is, well, super cool. It's also super crazy. So what is cheating? If anybody doesn't know, gaining an unfair advantage. If I would break it down into topics, it would be exploiting and glitch abuse, game state manipulation and injection, services, so boosting, and automation, making grinding basically bearable. So history of cheats, debug tools, Easter eggs, and alternate modes in games, secret content. You probably did a couple of those before in Quake, Doom, whatever the games you played, Mortal Kombat, if you remember, or even on older consoles. So my original presentation was called Gotta Catch 'em All, and one of the top things to remember, unhackable game is a myth. You will always have cheaters. The more audience you have, more cheaters will be. The more space there is to monetize cheats, the more people will have it accessible by default. Cheats have definitely evolved, and it's a dedicated business, as some of you already know. When it comes to cheating games, I already asked most of you who cheated, and only one guy paid. We haven't learned how much, but hopefully it wasn't a large amount. So who are the cheaters? Who are the creators? It's mostly hackers, programmers, scripters, copycats, people who generally take somebody else's stuff and use it for their own, resell it. You see that a lot in general on different forums, social channels, and such. The providers can either be legitimate companies and lone wolves. There is one big thing to remember. One of the things that we used in fighting cheating was actually tax evasion, because a lot of people actually don't pay their taxes when they make cheats and make a lot of money, and it was a very effective way to shut them down. The creators, if we are going to talk about those, hackers, research and development, basically creating loaders, injectors, and drivers for the state manipulation or DR manipulation to create cracks, and scripters basically who copy that stuff, add additional Yale layers and flavor to those cheats. So these guys, both the legitimate companies and lone wolves, actually use their own branding, marketing, support, community, and they handle the payments. We've seen many of many ways to do that. Generally, we've been in contact with people on many social sites, both VK, even in China as well. So it's a big business, and we need to remember they're going to take it that way. There are some changes already happening in the space of cheating, with changes of law and legislation, like you've seen in Korea, but it's going to be a slow process. So this fight is mostly about property damage. Where do they sell? They mostly sell in open communities where you can find free cheats and knowledge base. They advertise because that's where people usually start. You can also find cheat publishers with paid cheats that are easily accessible and closed communicates with private cheats and limited availability. Since a lot of the ideas around solving security in games and cheating revolve around getting your hands on the cheat itself and understanding what exactly it does. Having a private community that's hard to get hold of, where there is a single exploit that you don't know about and that's hard to discern. Those are the hardest ones to get your hands on, and of course some of the ones from the countries that you have no access to by default. Like China, especially, the language barrier can be huge. How do they sell? Dedicated websites like artificial aiming, perfect aim, directly on forums and social media with samples like unknown cheaters, hacker forums, and those closed communicates, especially on the Facebook groups and VK groups, if anybody uses that. So is it a legitimate business? It can definitely seem that way because they do taxes, they do a lot of stuff like a normal company. They have a presence, they have a business model, and they'll try their best to get the hold of the customer. So their business models usually revolve around subscriptions or standalone purchase. The subscription model is quite common, and you'll basically get updated cheat during the time you're subscribed. And with the standalone purchase usually cut off, except some of the private communities and direct suppliers, which actually offer cheats and updates for large sums of money. So you may basically make like a $500 standalone purchase, and while the person is interested in the game, he's definitely gonna update you, or at least skim some money off you, a couple dollars here and there. The standalone purchases happen on Skype, ICQ, IRC, VK, Facebook, and so on, so on. If you want to get hold of these cheats, you need to act instead of those who actually buy them. So you need to go out there and buy them yourself, reverse engineer them, and hopefully find out what exactly they do. They also get sold on forums and dedicated websites. What do they cost? That's actually an interesting take on the subject, because when you think about design of the games and how design affects the cheating in those games specifically, if I were to make an example, if there is too much grind in the game, there's also a lot more people who want to get through that grind through automation. If there is a competitive game, there are a lot more people who want to get boosted. With the amount of people playing the game, the price of course rises because undetected cheats are hard to get your hands on. And if you don't want to get your account banned, especially in the free-to-play title era, once you invested hundreds of dollars in that account, you want to keep it safe. The subscription model, it definitely goes above 25, but that's what we've seen on our game for the most part. Hopefully you had it easier. Just a couple samples from CSGO and Division, recent pricing on their cheats and what's available. So what makes the difference between those cheats? It's definitely the competition, because when you look at the distributors that create those cheats, there are loads of differences between those. From features, the service, the reliability, the communication. So usually you have a live chat to talk to a person who actually updates the cheat, or you can contact them directly through IM. Some of them are quite reliable, and they provide cheats almost on a daily basis as soon as they get detected. The service can quite vary, depend on who you're buying from, and the features definitely. This is a sample from a very old version of DayZ when it was quite hackable. Hopefully that's not the case anymore. We haven't seen that many cheaters in DayZ for a very long time after moving to authoritative architecture on the dedicated server, and most of the simulation happens on the servers these days. However, as you can see, like besides map, spawning weapons, teleporting, I remember actually a cheat in DayZ that because we had a weather simulation on the client, and it was kind of replicated to other clients sometimes. Somebody created like tornadoes in DayZ and forced them on other clients, and you couldn't basically play the game, see shit, or do anything. And it was annoying as hell. When it comes to features themselves, as you can see, like sometimes it's a huge list of things from immortality, generally just like auto-aim, helping with aiming, faking, map, seeing through walls, and many more. And I've seen some just cheats just made for fun in general. One of the things to remember, buying cheats is not so easy, both from public and private services, because they take precautions to limit the leaks of those cheats to developers, to get our hands on those, to be able to reverse engineer them. Sometimes I've seen them locked in a virtual machine with a hardware ID lock. That's usually always online cheats. Sometimes I've seen people asking for citizen ID when you're buying cheats, so we had to fake some of those as well. Probably not legal. Skype interviews, so especially when there is a language barrier and some of the private contractors or private sellers that do distribute to like 10 to 20 people at a time, use Skype interview to find out if the person out there is actually real. They check their Facebook account, they check their VK account, just to keep the limitation very hard, and you probably won't get your hands on that cheat, and you'll have to find out about the exploit another way. And we also created fake Facebook and VK accounts just for that. Not sure if I recommend that. So who buys them? That's a very good question, and it can have many answers, especially in terms of design. The harder your game is, more grind there is. Generally, there is more space for people to abuse. So difficulty issues and saving time is definitely the factors that go into it, and there is a specific category of cheaters, definitely griefers. Direct trolling and stream sniping, these guys basically get off on abusing the experience of the other players. There's an interesting thing to think about especially when you do multiplayer games and you have griefers. When you look at games like Apex, PUBG, I don't know, Fortnite, and you have an instance of 100 players, it's in general, from the companies that I talk to, you could see about 1% of the player base actually cheating most of the time. But as soon as they clump up into a larger pieces and you get this matrix, it's very easy for one single cheater to break an experience for 100 players. And so it's much more visible in the games with larger instance sizes. Yet it really thrives. Like, cheating is a big business, and it only grew with the introduction of these 3 games. As we introduced a lot more teenagers into the business with these, like, both Apex, PUBG, and Fortnite, we can see that cheating those has become a big thing. And also Epic Games recently bought Easy Anti-Cheat from Simon. They definitely see something in that. And it's going to be a topic for a lot of us, because I think if you're running a large multiplayer game, besides the services that are available out there, like BattleEye, Easy Anti-Cheat, and others, there is definitely going to be a necessity for you to get involved and start writing something of your own. Although the trend definitely is going to go away from the client-side protection by kernel drivers. So what does the revenue look like? Revenue for some of the public sites goes up to, actually this data is a bit older, recently definitely up to 2 million. Public seller of cheat for a single game can easily go up to 40K in dollars. So if you're a kernel programmer, go for it. That's a good income. Private seller of a cheat for a single game can go up to 5K. So it's still some good money, and people will pay for it gladly. I've seen people pay thousands for a cheat after they paid like $10 for a game. While it may seem ridiculous for me, it's probably not ridiculous for the player itself. So is it a problem? That's an easy answer. Yes, it's a problem. It damages the reputation of the game, causes bad reviews, it's a negative loop of experience, and unintended game experience, so we have no control over it. The worst part is, if your game is free to play, it gets even worse. At least with the barrier of entry, where you have some license control and some barrier of entry, although it's very easy for most cheater creators to buy the game and expand the licenses, at least you're taking something away from them. So how do they work? Basically, they find vulnerability vectors within the system that you created, either on the client side or the server side. They use reverse engineering tools, IDA, OLEDbug, Wireshark, to understand what your game is doing. They are building libraries or dedicated drivers and applications to affect or manipulate the state of the game, or the server, or the network communication, depending on the encryption. Where is it done? I've seen it done on PC, I've seen it done on consoles, I've seen it done on mobile, so basically everywhere. Sometimes it's harder, sometimes it's easier, but it's always done. One of the console titles that has been heavily affected by cheating is definitely Diablo 3. If you have seen some of the special items that the players created, it's been insane, basically turning stats into a full integer. Breakdown. I'm gonna get some water. Sorry, guys. So who's actually fighting cheating in their game right now? Like, he's actually has a problem with that. Nobody? Okay, guys, I'm gonna believe that. Okay, so client-side local manipulation is definitely one of the ways they do it. Server-side attacks, attacks on other players in peer-to-peer systems, so basically affecting the replication of your system. Hardware or software hacks, botting and automation, and exploiting, which is the worst part because those are the things that we introduce ourselves and leaving the ways behind for the guys to exploit. Client-side local manipulation usually has a common base, internal and external hacks. Most of them start with GitHub projects like Xenox and Cheat Engine, so they learn about memory manipulation or the state manipulation of the game. The internal cheating is composed of the component injector and loader, and DL implementing the cheat logic, usually hooking direct 3D calls, inline patching, switch engine interfaces, read-write memory, runs within the address space of the game. That's the difference there from the external cheating for the most part. Especially those that do only read memory and provide information or help, like especially ESPs, basically rendering items in games or players, are very hard to get rid of and can definitely damage, especially the competitive space or free-to-play space. External cheating runs usually in different process, reads process memory and writes process memory. There's no patching involved, only system calls, and usually use of transparent windows as well. Server-side active attacks usually start with manipulation of transmitted data, modifying packets in transit, repeating packets. That's very often the case. Introduction of artificial lag or disconnecting, so abusing your logic around disconnection of the client. And it's the best way to go around server-side checks by default and can be used outside of the client PC. Although that's not the only thing that I've seen. These days, especially on PUBG and Fortnite or Apex, because they are large games, we've seen even cheating that's based around having the game running in the virtual machine and affecting the virtual machine from the outside. So it gets even harder to detect because you have no way. And with the introduction of containerization, I'm expecting that to get even further, and it's going to be insane to detect. And you're going to be basically left with only stat-based anti-cheat systems in the future. As the operating systems close down, no kernel drivers will be easy to write, the protection of the application will be much harder, and stats will be the only way to go, most likely. So automation, botting, emulation of input, manipulation of the network, and min-maxing. I've did this myself, generally just using a macro keyboard. I remember days in Lineage 2 when I had a dwarf crafting things for like days, and it was the best thing ever because I could avoid clicking those things myself. But it's annoying, especially if it's causing problems in economy in your game or generally anything that's part of the core loop. Cheats are protected as well. That's a very important thing to remember. They use the same techniques that we do or within the games or the anti-cheats themselves. They're hiding the processes, hiding the drivers, interrupting the hooks that you're doing to the kernel for checks, system serving hooks as well, and VAD hiding. It's quite common these days. Why it works? Bugs and exploits, for the most part, that's something that we leave ourselves. Lack of encryption, that's something that you have to remember. But these days, especially with multi-platform games, with the TRCs of both PS4 and Xbox, you're kind of forced to implement encryption, but that should be standard anyways. Lack of server-side authentication, use of client-side authentication, which is the biggest problem, because still, especially when you think about genres and design, having those parts of the simulation in delay with 200, 400 milliseconds because of your synchronization island, it doesn't work with all the genres, and it's hard to get rid of sometimes, especially like using DayZ as an example. We used a lot of client-side authentication because we were born on the engine of Arma originally, which is also a moddable multiplayer game, a very specific genre. So having open data, your scripts and everything readable by the community, and your mistakes open, they are easy to find. And it's hard to build a very complicated FPS with a grid inventory that's only server-side. It's not as easy as it seems, apparently. We still are in a world where we cannot run everything server-side, and it's very important to remember. So even when you're thinking about design and possible abuse in your game, it's something to keep in mind, what's going to be running on the server and what's going to be running on the client. And if this gets abused, does it affect the other players' experiences? Because that's the best way to think about it. If cheating only affects the experience of the person who's doing it, it's probably when you think about the design and things that are going to stay on client. Yeah, genre-specific and design-specific. So let's talk about protecting our games and how we get that done. So the approach that you should take, depending on where you are. Standalone application protecting the game process. It's still a thing. There are lots of guys doing it out there. A lot of games that are using either Easy Anti-Cheat or Battle.ai or other products. I can't remember from the top of my head the other ones, but definitely quite common. Proper architecture, server client, something to remember always. Anything you leave on client, it's going to get hacked by default. Network encryption, something not to forget about. Stats-based checks. So this is something that is definitely going to be more future-proof, using heuristics and gathering stats, machine learning, to identify the outliers in your gameplay is going to be the best way to go forward, especially because that's the only way to do it platform agnostic. And you'll see abusers, exploiters, automation on all platforms, and you're not going to be running a kernel driver on a PS4 or Xbox in the future. One thing that might change that, though, is, of course, streaming. All of us have seen probably Stadia and the new thing from Microsoft that might come out at some point. Generally, streaming of the games might change that, but we still can expect automation, exploiting, and a couple other stuff that still happens, even though people don't have access to the client or the simulation itself. So it's still an important thing to keep an eye on. Player behavior analysis, definitely very important thing in terms of service. Write them properly so you can use them to properly handle licensing around the game. And yeah, if you can, probably do all of it together. That's the best way. Rules, that's an easy one. Anything on the client can and will be hacked. Server-side code is only as safe as your server, something to remember. One of the things that threw me off by surprise, was actually when we were hosting DayZ servers about 3 years ago. Those servers were also used for other games, which I didn't think about before. But as soon as I realized there were actually zero-day and root exploits in some of the older applications that those servers were running. Like, for example, those servers were running Half-Life 2 servers, and those can easily can be used to root the server because they haven't been updated in a while. There are lots of security holes. So always ask your provider if he's running anything else on your hardware. That's a very important thing. Where we are with DayZ. So yeah, we're using BatLi as a standalone application to protect the game. That's the thing that is used as a prevention. It's also used as something that we use to basically control the licenses. We also moved to proper architecture of server client, everything besides like some of the stuff that's very high-paced, and even that has a sanity check on the server. We also use network encryption on all platforms. We use stat-based checks these days, but it's very basic, so I wouldn't count on it yet. We are not ready with the player behavior analysis, nowhere near there. Our data-driven decisions are not done yet, and I definitely recommend using all of it together. So where to start? Definitely, if you have a game or you want to learn something about it, about cheating as a whole, start buying cheats. That's the best way to go forward. Reverse engineer them if you have the skill, and be proactive. Use the same tools as they do. When people out there find exploits in your games, they usually use IDA, Oli Debug, Wireshark, or even just play the game, same as your QA, so they're going to find those exploits at some point. It's all about the mindset that they have. Start building a solid base to understand your product, to understand what's important and where the abuse happens. Consider the features of cheats which harm the game the most and give it a priority list. It's very important. For example, if a player is able to join a server and kill everybody on that server, it's probably highest priority of all those cheats. Stay safe. A lot of cheats act as malware. Use separate network and VPN when you're buying them. Also, when you're reverse engineering them, ideally. We've had a couple cheats which were used as malware, and humans do mistakes. So I had one security engineer run a cheat for analysis, and he basically downloaded all the data that he had on his personal computer and sent it over to the cheat creator. It's quite common, so be aware of that, because they actually got some of the passwords for our internal systems this way. Yeah, that was a learning experience. Protect your company and assets, email, source, and player information. It's super important that these guys don't get their hands on this because you didn't use a separate network or a VPN to buy that shit. Layered protection, very important to think about when you think about battling cheating. It's all about prevention. So yeah, prevention is the kernel driver that's protecting your game. Obfuscation, detection. Detection usually comes either from the stat-based systems or the kernel driver when it detects the intrusion. Obfuscation, so hide your data well. Try to work with your memory as well. And the banning strategy. That's a very important thing to look into and legal. So let's look at those in detail. So standalone kernel driver, use BatLi, kernel API, similar to antiviruses. So a lot of, even like the creators of cheats that you see these days are people who left antivirus companies by default. So people who are used to writing C++ or low-level code or play with kernel calls. One of the prevention tactics is, of course, legal. So scare tactics, site takedown, and text reports. Yeah, that's a very good one. I recommend that one. Especially IRS loves text reports. So if somebody makes 2 million on something, IRS really wants to know that. Anti-cheat vectors. In process, they use signature checks, game-specific checks, pointer chain checks, call stack periodic checks, and debug-related detections. Generally, they do a lot more, but a lot of it is like industrial secret. So definitely talk to the guys from BatLi or Easy Anti-Cheat, and you'll learn more. Out of process, scanning for the game process handle, signature-based detection, pattern scanning in all processes, and address space. I've seen worse things done by anti-cheat systems. One of those, which I will not name, actually screenshots your screen or takes headers of your applications running, which is probably illegal. I'm not sure completely, but definitely in some countries. So there are certain limits that we can't pass, especially with GDPR these days. It's even harder if you don't want to get hit by that, and that's a hammer. Privacy concerns. Yeah, the screen capture, scanning of files for signatures, and checking DNSs to our cheat update servers. Again, definitely something that we shouldn't do, although I've seen it done. Detection, statistics versus signature versus heuristic, standalone kernel driver that we use Batleye, stat-based data analysis, player behavior analysis. That's where your detection happens. That's where you learn about that the guy is cheating. Logging, keep your logs, that's very important. Especially if you're on a game, multiplayer one, if you're running it, and try to implement sanity checks for the stuff that you need to keep on client. Change your code often. It's very important. Like regular updates actually make the work of cheaters much harder, depending on how you work with your data. But that's a very good approach. Because if their cheat is not working half the time, they will not have customers. So yeah, both the client and the kernel driver should change their code very often. Use of binary and strict obfuscation, use of virtual machines, use ban waves as scare tactics, random ban times, that's very good, so they cannot associate their action with the ban. That's very important, because when the researchers or creators of the cheats actually research the exploits, if you ban them immediately after they do something, they'll know and they'll avoid that one for sure. So waste their time. Banning strategy, very important. Consider time-based bans. One of the things that I learned from the experience is also like permaban is not always a solution. You want to rehabilitate your cheaters because they are players, they are usually paying, and you will find a way to get them in the game for them to play the game normally. So it's very common in most of the multiplayer games, although sometimes it gets abused and creates quite a toxic environment. I think Guild Wars 2 has a system where if somebody gets banned, they actually get transported in a different instance with only cheaters, and they can't get out of that. And that's definitely annoying because that brews just a toxic environment when people just battle with cheats. While that might be fun for somebody to watch, even us, it definitely doesn't bring anything positive to the game by itself. So you still have to consider permanent bans for some of the griefers. Consider use of hardware ID bans. We had to more than once. Use multiple hardware IDs as well. So it's harder to detect and harder to find out. We never had a case where somebody bought a computer of a cheater and we are able to confirm that we actually banned somebody that should be playing the game, but maybe that will happen at some point, who knows. So yeah, ban waves and be mindful of false positives, because even though we try our best, there are gonna be false positives for sure. Cool, we're good on time, that's nice. Okay, so privacy concerns, interesting numbers, this is the important part. The numbers of bans usually floats around 1 to 2% in most games that I've seen, especially those with the barrier of entry by payment. With the free-to-play, that might change. Look at your repeated offense rate for sure. It has been about 70% for us. So a lot of our cheaters were actually griefers by default because people want to cheat. And VEC bans at the moment from total Steam accounts are about 1.5%. If you actually publish your games on Steam, there is something that they call game ban. It's a very important thing to remember, because so your license control, while it can be stored in the kernel driver or the system or the backend that you're using to close off the access for the person to play your game, game ban is a system in Steam that you can ban the license by an API call to Steam, and it's an important thing because it's just a secondary, you don't have a single point of failure for your license systems, because I've seen like multiple DDoS attacks on our license control, and cheaters basically DDoS the server where we check those licenses. As soon as it got down, they started playing because the check didn't go through. So having a secondary check, especially with as large of a company as Valve, is probably a good thing. So I highly recommend implementing game bans. So banning, legal, and community, another topic that's very, very important. So who gets involved in those companies? Legal department, if you don't have one, at least hire a lawyer or find one who understands the stuff. Digital is kind of hard these days, and good lawyers are even harder to come by, so it's going to be probably a long search. Production needs to get involved to understand the priorities, send those priorities. Dedicated staff that are that generally do the research. Programmers, build engineers around obfuscation. Designers, definitely. Think about the design of their game a lot, where it can get abused, what's it going to cause, especially like with these days with free-to-play titles. Keep a log, keep a history, so that you are able to rollback a player to a certain point. Generally, just keep things and history available all the time. And cheaters themselves. We employed cheaters in the past, and we're probably going to do it in future because those guys know their stuff. So I highly recommend it to all of you to get in touch with them if you want to learn something about cheating. So when it comes to roles for legal, I highly recommend, as I said, talks for the reporting, protection of people involved, especially in US, swatting is a thing. I remember a discussion with, I think it was a producer of FIFA, and he gets a lot of hate. He actually bought his property under fake name because he would get swatted for like FIFA updates, which is definitely not fun. It's something that happens, and you need to keep an eye on that. Me personally, I've been attacked by cheaters a couple times. To be specific, I think it was like Christmas Day 2016. They blocked my phone by IP telephony for the whole day. I couldn't call anybody. It doesn't seem as harsh, but it's still annoying. And those prank calls continued for like 2 months. So I had to change my number then. Takedown of sites through legal notice and contacting the hosting servers. Although if you have any experience with cheating, you know that a lot of people host in Canada under the company OW, I can't remember the name, and they just don't give a fuck about our legal notices. It's one of the companies that most cheaters use to host their shit. Roles, production, what do they need to do? Keep your priorities straight, be mindful of what is hurting your user base. So yeah, the priorities are important, be transparent, and work with everybody involved. Dedicated staff that is used to buy cheats. Generally use fake accounts, start being a part of the cheating world to understand where it comes from, create fake identities, use VPNs, hosted servers, physically separate network, and start building a reputation. Those are the people that are going to be doing much of the work that's needed. Programmers, look at the architecture and the changes needed, prioritize them properly, and think about server-side validation, network encryption, and client-server architecture. How you can implement that, when you can implement that, how soon, and what is most important to get out there on the server. Build engineers by encrypting your data, obfuscating where you can, removing debug functions. Yes, that's important. I remember we actually published an internal executable once because CI failed. Not a fun experience. I highly recommend not to do that. And don't lose your source. Yeah, that happened to us as well. We had one old wiki server up there somewhere in the intrawebs. Somebody found it and he had access to our SVN repository. Not exactly ideal, and they actually stole our source like 2015. Another learning experience. But that's what happens with the companies that are like 15, 16 years old. There are some historical things that nobody remembers. So even with the audit, we didn't find it originally. Design, think about why people cheat, especially in your game, how to change the systems and design to close these holes. Look at the data and think about how you rehabilitate those players, how you enable those players, or even sell them something. People cheat, maybe they can buy something that enables the same thing. So what is the ultimate goal? Security in its many forms. Lack of resources for incident response, varied incidents with no clear practice on how to solve them, monitor, and identify them. And these are things that you're going to encounter when you're battling cheat here. DDoS, data leaks, game integrity issues, account management, data management. Those are things that you need to keep an eye on. All of these can cause quite a mess. Delayed releases because of severe security issues. I've had that happen multiple times on different games because it was just generally broken. Bad player experience due to lack of the game integrity. So you're losing players because of cheating, and we lost a lot of players because of that, and I think we're not the only game that went through it. And you see it even these days with the largest games, people just complaining about cheaters all the time. In PUBG, the Chinese, for example, we have a Chinese forum here, I think, somewhere in Dubrovnik happening right now, so maybe we can ask them. And unexpected offline time on the products that you run. Large security incidents with data leaks, I've seen as well. So keep your security in check. If you can do penetration testing, I highly recommend it because all of these things actually contribute as external factors to cheating in your games because people find more information than they should have available. Although security through obscurity is probably not the way to go. Uh, let's see what the time. Okay, 47. I'm gonna do another 5 minutes, talk about like how we did implement the security department in our company, and we can have like, let's say 10 minutes for the questions. And if you guys want to talk afterwards, I'm gonna be available as well. So yeah, most companies, there's an example that's actually seen in Riot as well. Specialized departments like security operations, player security, application security, and company security. What do they mean? SecOps usually means incident response in this case. So they use protocol for different incident types, monitoring the status and cause analysis. Containment and recovery of the set problem and post-incident. So lessons learned so you can actually fix something afterwards. Continual improvement is the thing for SecOps. We actually have like 2 guys in the company who work on similar things, and hopefully that's gonna grow. Same thing goes for application and product security. Focus on identifying vulnerabilities by reverse engineering and static analysis in your products, eliminating the ways to tamper with the product itself, both on games, services, and management of the bounty program. That's a very important thing that I highly recommend. There is, I think, the company is called HackerOne. It's one of the top ones that does like payouts in terms of accounting for hackers that report cheats or bugs. Google uses them, Riot uses them, Blizzard uses them, I think. The last one, probably, not sure. Anyways, like it's actually used by a lot of gaming companies these days, and I highly recommend them. The important thing to remember about this slide is especially the services, because your games are not only the client and the server that you run, but also all the backend services that are associated with it, and those can be attacked as well. Player security, something that a lot of people forget about, reporting of cheaters, focus on identifying and solving issues of bad player security. So account management is extremely important. Having a good front end for managing the account of a player to access the information, its history, logging, actions is very important for you to find out what happened. Payment and credit fraud, something that especially the free-to-play titles, mobile titles fight. It's less common in the other ones. Harassment and suicidal behavior, something that you might get reported as well. We've seen it happen and had luck actually helping some of the people. Company security, also, as I said, if you don't protect your company, somebody's gonna get more information than he needs, and it's gonna end up in a bad way. So harassment, data management, and copyright management, including InfoSec. So that generally covers what a security growth that you'll see in your company, especially if you have like a large game, multiplayer game, you're gonna get. And I highly recommend to do so fast, because cheating can actually put the game down under. We got about 15 minutes. I'm gonna close down the talk right now, and I'm gonna start with questions probably. I think it makes sense. Hopefully you guys have some good ones, and hopefully I can answer them.
Yeah, so if we have any questions, I'll pass you the mic, then we'll pass it back and forth.
Hi. So when you buy a cheat, what are the first steps to do when you reverse engineer them?
I can actually shout or use the mic, sorry. So yeah, IDA is usually the first application that we use to identify what's happening there, to do the reverse engineering, and it's done by dedicated staff. And it happens, as I said, on a separate network, just to isolate the possible incident. And we have like fake installations, so it's usually, because the cheats sometimes even like detect like the installation, so we have to have the game, for example, things like that. Generally, we have like a sample for our game, like a sample image for a computer that we flash, that where we run the analysis of the cheat on. Sometimes when they stream the cheat in, because that's something that we encountered a lot, they stream actually a fake cheat that when we reverse actually doesn't give us any information. So it's good to be prepared. Like that's the first thing that we do. Have an image that we use that looks like an actual player that uses it, compares to things that that we told to the guy, so like the games we play or whatever during the interview, and that's where we run the analysis by default. So using IDA for the most part. Does that answer the question? Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, we'll record it.
So you mentioned BattleEye and Easy Anti-Cheat. So I was wondering if you could compare using both, if you have experience with them, like which is better and at what. And also, like a side question, has Epic's acquisition of Easy Anti-Cheat affected your use of it in future games? The first part of the question is compare BattleEye and Easy Anti-Cheat, because you mentioned both. I guess you worked with both of them. So like, which is better for which? What's your experience?
So when it comes to Easy Anti-Cheat and BattleEye, hopefully neither of the guys are here, because both of them are my friends, both Bastian and Simon, who are responsible for those products. We've had better success with the BattleEye, but that's something that we, as a company, have used for a very long time. We've been with BattleEye like 6 years ago, before it became a big thing. When it comes to Easy Anti-Cheat, I like what the guys are gonna do with the stat-based stuff, but now that they are actually bought by Epic, I'm not certain if it's going to become like a part of Epic Game Store offering, or if it's even going to be offered down the road. So right now, I generally recommend to look into like a 3 to 5 year plan, find somebody, and start working on a data-driven anti-cheat by yourself, especially if you have a large game. So when it comes to comparing those products, I like BattleEye more, but that might be personal preference. They seem to be better in detection, less in prevention, and Easy Anti-Cheat is generally better in prevention and worse in detection. That's like general experience.
We can't throw it.
For companies who are making middleware used by these online games, is there any special advice or anything that we should take into account to protect our customers?
You mean like games specifically, like other products besides those two, or?
Yeah, no, sorry, middleware that's not specific for security.
Not specific for security. Okay. I actually have no experience. Most of the stuff in Bohemia we do ourselves. So actually the only part of the game that is external is the BattleEye right now. So I don't think the answer would be a valid one. Sorry. Any other questions? Yay!
Hi, have you seen any cheats based on the newly discovered Spectre and Meltdown attacks in the wild yet?
At the moment, I only seen it, so I attend some hacking conferences every now and then. So I've seen it used just for fun, but not really as a sold product, at least not on our game. Like the most advanced stuff that I've seen is the manipulation of the virtual machine where the game runs. Like that's the most advanced stuff, and it seems like the hardest to detect right now. Any other questions? No questions? Oh.
Do you have any suggestions for actually like comments on code obfuscation through the Nuvo or something similar? Do you have any experience with that, and or what's the success of it?
It really depends on the type of the game itself. So for us, it wasn't a use case that we could go for in general, because we're large multiplayer, multiple game. So not something that we tried fully. We dabbled in it. We tried the Nuvo specifically, but we were unable to implement it in a way where the overhead was manageable. that's about it. So I think for a lot of the times it's about the cost and the overhead that you're bringing in with that obfuscation. So not sure what's the best way to do it, but it's definitely game specific. So if you want to talk more about it, we can talk after that one. Any other questions? If there are no questions, I thank you for watching my presentation and hearing me talk. And hopefully we'll talk more on the conference. I'll be here in the next 2 days. Thank you, guys.